You have to get control of your borders. You're not even a nation if you don't have a border. If I were sitting in a sacrament meeting and ICE came in, I would defend my Lamanite brothers and sisters. In that intimate, somewhat traumatic setting, that neighbor discloses to you that they're in the country illegally. Would you go home and call ICE?
So immigration right at the forefront of political and social issues right now. Where does the church stand? How is this going to work with the Trump administration and all the deportation and the conflicts that may arise there? We've already seen a move by the church to kind of concede in on some things that the Trump administration is demanding, not concession to the Trump administration, but in their approach and in their verbiage and what they're saying on their website, etc., including on BYU's website. But Paul Mero is the right person to talk to about this. He's been involved with these things with the church, with the Sutherland Institute, which he ran, and then in D.C. for decades, and got a lot of inside information on this. He's actually evolved a little bit on his position with this, but this is really interesting. We're going to see what's going to happen here with these issues. We had the same issue with, 2009, 2010, where Utah passed a certain bill and the church helped influence that on immigration as well. So with Paul Mero, I think you're going to enjoy this discussion on the hot point of the church and immigration. Now, this episode here is brought to you by Gospel on the Nile, right? I am the official spokesperson for Go and Do Travel. Gospel on the Nile is a trip that we are doing 3-5 times this year. We've already got 2 more open for next year. Incredible trip. Absolutely amazing trip. These things fill up quickly. All of these spring 2025 trips have already filled up. We have openings in October and November, and in early 2026, we've got 2 more trips that have opened up also. You're going to love this. You're going to love this. Go to CwicMedia.com. Scroll to the top, go to trips and events, and then scroll down to Gospel on the Nile. Here we go.
All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Matsen, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring back Paul Mero to talk about the issue of immigration. Paul, how are you doing?
Great, thank you.
You know, this is a pretty hot subject right now. A lot going on. Deportations, planes, military planes, taking immigrants from all parts of the United States out into their native countries. Yeah. Where do you stand on immigration? Where do you think the church should stand on immigration, and why?
Well, my experience goes back a decade and or more. 2010, 2011, the Utah legislature decided to finally deal with the issue of immigration the way that we're dealing with it today, with the same seriousness and intensity. And there were a group of Utah legislators, a handful, 5 or 6, who traveled down to Arizona in April of 2010. Arizona passed a pretty, I would say, harsh immigration bill. The polite term would be enforcement only. And curiously, the guy who pushed the bill in Arizona was a stake president, LDS stake president, named Russell Pierce. Mm-hmm. And that passed, and it caught the attention of the conservative caucus up here at the Utah legislature. All my friends, all my conservative comrades, if you will, and they went down to Arizona, talked to Russell Pierce, and they brought that idea back to Utah, and they started pressing. In 2010, public opinion in Utah was 70% in favor of the Arizona enforcement-only approach. And a few years before that, we had dealt with things like E-Verify, where employers had to check the status of their potential employees. And so there were a few issues like that had happened and rolled up into 2010 and this experience. I knew it was a third rail politically to touch in Utah. And I was, this was when I was running Sutherland Institute. And it wasn't an issue on the radar of Sutherland Institute, other than, just the margins, the adjacent. And I was on Temple Square, and I was talking to a senior church official about something different. I wanted to hold a World Congress of Families event. And this would have been 2008 or 9. And we finished our discussion. I was walking out of the room. I had my hand on the doorknob of his office, and I turned around real quick and I just said, hey, does the church have a position on immigration? And he paused and he said, I don't know, but I do. Have a seat. And for the next almost an hour, he taught me, if you will, his position on immigration, which after that conversation made perfect sense to me. So I'll explain it. He introduced me to a couple Latin terms, malum prohibitum and malum in se. The former being it's wrong because of a man-made law. The other, it's wrong because it's intrinsically immoral. It's inherently wrong, like murder. Okay. So this senior church official, he said, did you drive to work today? I said, yeah. He said, did you go over the speed limit? I said, of course. He said, did you feel like you had to confess your sins to your bishop? I said, no. He goes, malum prohibitum, man-made law. It's a law. Speed limit is a law. But, it's what man made up. It could be 55 miles an hour in one place and 80 miles an hour in another place, right? So, there's some give. There's some give. And he's not telling me to break the law. He didn't tell me that, for heaven's sakes. But he made his point. And he said, that's the way I feel about immigration. The reality back in 2010 was that if a person, let's say from Mexico, came across the southern border for the first time, it was the criminal equivalent of an infraction, not a misdemeanor, not a felony, an infraction, like a speeding ticket. Your first time across the border was an infraction. And it only became a felony once you left the country and came back again, undocumented. Okay. Then all of a sudden it's a felony. And after my conversation with that church leader, I thought about it more, and I went back to the office, the Sutherland office, talked to my colleagues. They didn't like the idea that Sutherland would pick up this issue. And I said, I'm feeling strongly about it now, and in a different way. I'm not an enforcement-only guy. I'm actually seeing these immigrants as human beings and not as criminals. So, for instance, the policy today under the new Trump administration, though not explicit yet, is that if you come into this country undocumented, you're inherently a criminal. And so they're all criminals. Well, any of us who've lived around undocumented immigrants in our communities understand that they're not criminals. They are otherwise law-abiding residents of the state. So back in 2010, I made this case, and I wrote a memo to my board of trustees at Sutherland. And the memo was lengthy. It ultimately turned into an essay that we published as an institute called Onus or Opportunity, Conservatism and Immigration. And I made the case for comprehensive immigration reform. My case was simple. Let's create public policy that brings these individuals already living in Utah. I didn't care about the border. I agreed with everybody who wanted to close the border. I'm not an open borders guy. As a conservative, I'm just not an open borders guy. But also as a conservative, I feel like our public policies have to be humane and prudent and principled. And so my argument was, let's create public policy that brings the individuals already living here in Utah, at the time about 100,000 undocumented immigrants, and let's bring them to the surface of society. Bring them out of the shadows. The ones who don't come out of the shadows, they're your criminals, and go get them. But for instance, you might have an undocumented immigrant family living next door to a meth lab. Well, they're not going to call the police and turn in the meth lab people, because they know then they're going to be under the scrutiny of ICE. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to do that. There were undocumented immigrant parents who would not walk their children to school. The children were on their own to go to school because the parents didn't want to be in the line of sight of potentially, getting arrested. The idea of enforcement only, where everybody's considered a criminal who's an undocumented immigrant, leads us down, as a conservative, I argued, would lead us down a path to a police state. People getting pulled over, asking for your papers. That to me sounded like Nazi Germany, not Utah in 2010. And so Sutherland Institute was the leading conservative voice in Utah outside of the LDS Church. And so when we published that paper, I did it purposely on Cinco de Mayo, kind of rub it in. That's just the way I am. It's my personality. The conservative caucus inside the state legislature went crazy. I received phone calls, emails. One legislator told me that I'm no conservative. President Benson would be ashamed of. I knew President Benson. President Benson would be ashamed of you, Paul. You're just not a faithful Latter-day Saint. So, getting to the end of that narrative, it turns out in 2011, after 10 months of me and my colleagues attacking this policy, public opinion in Utah shifted from 70% in favor of Arizona to 70% in favor of comprehensive immigration reform.
And that was due to?
That was due to our work. That was due to us. There was a young man, talented young man. He works for the Chamber of Commerce, I think, in Clearwater, Florida now, but he was with the Chamber here, and he came up with this idea called the Utah Compact. And he said, we need a rallying point. We need a document where Utahns could read it simply. It's a short document. They could read it quickly and go, yeah, I agree with that. So we released that in August of 2010. And by the time we got to January 2011 legislative session, we swung public opinion 70% the other way. And in March, Governor Herbert, with about 20 of us, signed 4 immigration bills that we had created. And so Utah became this case study for the rest of the nation at the time. Other states were calling the governor's office. We were getting phone calls. How did you do that? You're the reddest of the red states. And how you passed comprehensive immigration reform? You gave undocumented immigrants work permits. You gave them driver's licenses. How did you do this, right? So I'm pleased to say that the 5 or 6 members of that conservative caucus didn't win re-election. And one of them actually, he was an architect. He so kind of wealthy. He climbed Mount Everest, and he got caught on one of the base camps, and was going to die. And he's laying in his tent, and the guys left him, and he's dying from whatever. And he has a come to Jesus moment. And the thing he said once he got back home, the thing that came to his mind was he needs to ask for repentance on what he did on immigration. So that's the story.
So I remember back at that time, I was in Arizona at that time, when we had passed the bill that was pretty strong. And it was the first time I had seen a conservative member of the church completely upset with the church. Right? It would always, for me, usually it was people that were on the left.
Yeah.
You know, and because, fairly conservative church. And it was the first time I ever saw a conservative, Orthodox type member of the church really upset at the church for what they did. They just she couldn't believe that the church would go along with this issue of immigration and the law, and of course the article of faith. I don't know what it is.
Being obedient.
Being obedient to the laws of the land and all those things, right? I remember that. But okay, so what about, though, I think there's different layers to this. So that, I think that, I know several people that are Latinos that have been in the States for a very long time, that are undocumented. Yeah. I can't imagine taking them and pulling them out from their homes and their families or anything. I just can't imagine doing that, right? I would be completely against that.
Yeah.
But what about, to begin with, what about prevention?
Yeah.
What about preventing this from happening in the first place before they ever get here?
Yeah.
The problem with the comprehensive, as I recall, because I remember when McCain was working on this.
Okay.
And the issues were those that were fighting against McCain, the conservatives that were fighting against McCain, would oftentimes go back and talk about Reagan. Well, Reagan, by a pen stroke,
1985,
everybody's legal, right? Good to go. But it was done under the premise that the Democrats, once that was done, the border would be secured.
Right.
And then it never was.
Correct.
Right. So that was always the argument. Look, there's no prevention. There's no stopping. It's always, let's just keep letting everybody in, swipe or pen stroke, everybody's good to go. And that's just in perpetuation. Right. Isn't that a problem with part of the idea of a comprehensive immigration reform?
Yeah, not in the narrative I just shared, because Utah was only concerned about the ones who were here. So they knew that, first of all, any state dealing with this issue is violating the supremacy clause of the Constitution. So any of these states right now, Texas, all of them who are implementing their own policies and laws to address it, they're violating the supremacy clause, because immigration is a federal only issue, right? So it wasn't a problem in Utah. I think the answer to me now, Greg, is of course to enforce the border. I should also add that I worked for 2 Southern California congressmen, my 10 years on Capitol Hill in D.C. I've been to the border. Several times. California, I get it. California is a mess, right? And being at the border at night is surreal. Watching everybody line up on the other side of the fence, the other side of the gate, to just climb it and go and run. And there's just so many images in my mind from that experience where it just there is no legal immigration policy in the United States that's functional. It's all dysfunctional. The legal immigration system is broken because Congress doesn't have the you-know-whats to step up and to...
But either side.
And either side never has had this. Reagan had his own thing, right? He had his own way of looking at it, kind of like I've described. And he just said, you know what, this is how I'm going to solve it. You're not going to solve it, then I'm going to try to solve it. But yeah, Congress has the ability to close the border, open the border, regulate the border, whatever they want to do. That's the real problem. So border enforcement's important. I mean, when you're dealing with a scenario, let's say you're at the border crossing between California, between whatever's beneath San Diego and Tijuana, right? You're right there where all the cars go through. You have 400 illegal immigrants rushing through the turnstile kind of way, right up the highway. You might have 14 Border Patrol people. One of the guys told me that when that happens, he's got one hand because he's got to keep his other hand on his gun so they don't take the gun out of his holster. How many people do you think they catch? See, that's the mess. So yes, you can close the border. I believe in that firmly. But the better public policy, the additional better public policy, is to take the immigration fight into Central and South America, is to do a couple things. Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, I think he's touring Latin America right now. He ought to be talking to them about how do we improve your economies down here so that people feel like they can make a living, in combination with how we should come in with military and destroy those cartels. But you can't destroy the cartels unless you have a viable economy so that the ones who have been working for the cartels, regular folk, have an option. You've been to Mexico. You know what it's like. You got to have an option. And trust me, you and I, if we were in that position on the other side of the border, where either through violence or economic despair, we didn't know what to do, and we were 6 inches away from the United States, both you and I would take that step.
No question. Absolutely.
Right?
There's no question.
Exactly. So we're dealing with human beings with true human, sincere motives. And I mean, by and large, I get there's criminals. I don't know about all these numbers that Trump talks about, millions or hundreds of thousands or whatever. Fine. It doesn't even matter. The numbers don't even matter anymore. What matters is the public policy that actually will create solutions to better the lives of people who are wanting to come here and to better our lives, the ones who live here.
The problem is I mean, Rubio can go around and talk about these things and get some ideas. Let's find people, you could probably get El Salvador right now. It could probably work with you pretty well. Most of those countries are very socialist.
Yeah.
They don't like the United States.
Yep.
They are corrupt as can be.
Yes.
And you cannot have a viable economy with that level of corruption and socialism.
Yeah. So how do you control that?
Yeah. So how do you control that? How do you change that? I mean, you're talking about a mountain of a change.
This is, and I even hate to say it because I'm not his supporter, this is a Trump moment. This is a moment made for Donald Trump. This is a moment made for a guy who doesn't care what they think, who only wants to protect the United States of America. I don't know his heart, obviously, but my guess is he doesn't share my heart about the issue.
Mm-hmm.
He sees it maybe a little differently, maybe a lot differently. But he is the guy right now who has the power, just like he did when was it Venezuela or Colombia that wouldn't accept the plane? Colombia wouldn't accept the plane. He said, fine, 25% tariff on everything that you send to the United States. And if you don't do it within a week, I'll make it 50%.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? Next day, 24 hours, boop, they let the plane land. Now, there's still going to be day-to-day issues. There's going to be combative politics. I get it. But you have to try. You have to put pressure on these countries. In fact, if they're corrupt, they should be easier to deal with because it's all about money and power. That's it. That's it. I mean, when back in the day, in the 60s and 70s, the United States propped up how many dictators? Let's just call them that. How many dictators in South America and around the world? There's ways,
but none of those things changed. I mean, we had a short-term change in Panama. You have a short-term change in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
You know, but
it just takes somebody with some guts.
Yeah, like you've got in Argentina and El Salvador right now. I mean, everything has changed for them because of the one guy in charge.
Yeah,
who has, quite frankly, close to dictator capacity.
Absolutely. That's how you fight corruption. That's what I'm saying. It's a Donald Trump moment. It's a king for a day moment. And I think that he's the right guy at the right time. I don't like him, but he's the right guy at the right time to do what it takes to get these Central and South American countries to wake up and pay attention.
Yeah, it's interesting because those countries, I mean, especially Mexico, they I don't remember I want to say it's almost 20% of their economy comes from U.S. dollars being sent back from immigrants in the United States. That might be the wrong number. I don't remember, but they're dependent.
Yeah,
they're heavily. That's why they have no problem with all these people leaving. We'd have a problem if we had all these people leaving our country. Our economy would start shrinking. Theirs grows because they're bringing the U.S. dollars back in.
Yeah.
Right. But so with that dependence, you have to substitute it with something.
Yes.
You know, you have to create jobs. You have to have industry. You have to.
Well, that was part of the reason why NAFTA got pushed. Was to do this. I'm not talking about creating another NAFTA by any means. That was a disaster.
Well, we're in the exact opposite environment right now with Trump too. I mean, he's
not going to NAFTA anything. No, he's like, no, come home. Yeah, but like I said, he's the guy. Greg, I think why this is important to me is because this is one issue that really separates, it kind of culls the herd among conservatives, I think. I can tell an authentic conservative on this issue. And like, I don't think Trump's an authentic conservative. I really don't. I think Marco Rubio, I don't know why I keep mentioning him. He's just Secretary of State. And I just read about it in the paper that he's on this Latin America tour. I think Rubio is close to an authentic conservative. Anyway, but if you're like a Bill Buckley, William F. Buckley Jr. kind of conservative, Buckley grew up in Mexico, by the way, even though he had that weird English accent.
Yeah.
I know, that's odd. But his dad was an oil driller in Mexico and Texas, and he grew up down there. But, he was not a hardliner. He believed in a secure border. He believed in borders. But, and towards the end of his life, he was a little harder on the issue. But throughout his professional career, the guy who basically ran the conservative movement for decades in the United States, considered maybe the father of modern conservative in the U.S., wasn't a hardliner on it. He was a Reagan guy, right? Where do you think Reagan came up with this idea on his own? No. Who sits in council with Ronald Reagan? Oh, yeah, the guy that publishes the magazine that Reagan reads, National Review, Bill Buckley. So anyway, I think for me, authentic conservatism deals with humane public policy and prudence, not just hardcore principle, but prudence and humane public policy. In other words, an authentic conservative sees the government of the United States, the federal government, not as the enemy, but as part of a socioeconomic governmental structure that helps us live the pursuit of happiness. And in that case, the government can secure the border, should secure the border. But the government we shouldn't call on the government to become a police state, where we're turning our neighbors in. Here's an anecdote for you. In 2010, when I'm running Sutherland, at the time in the Republican Senate primary, Senator Mike Lee was then candidate Mike Lee, and he was in a Republican primary with Tim Bridgewater. Tim Bridgewater was a businessman. Tim Bridgewater is a friend of mine. Tim Bridgewater was on the board of Sutherland Institute. I held a debate that we streamed live, and here's what I asked them. I said, gentlemen, you're both LDS, right? Faithful LDS. And they shook their heads, yes. I said, let me give you a scenario. What if you got a phone call from a neighbor who had a sick child, and the neighbor asked you to come over and help minister to that child? In that intimate, somewhat traumatic setting, that neighbor discloses to you that they're in the country illegally. Would you go home and call ICE? They just stared at me. And I said, Mike, would you call ICE? And he says, nope. Tim, would you call ICE? No, but, and then he gave some kind of a spiel. I voted for Mike Lee for Senate. Not only that, but also he actually knew conservative books that I had read, but, my point is Mike Lee is probably considered a very stalwart conservative. I think anybody would say that. Yet that's how he answered the question. Why? Because he's a human being. He gets it. He understands that these are human beings we're talking about. So it's certainly a complex issue, but all public policy is. But there are layers to this, like you say. The border is a tough thing, but you have to close it. You have to seal it. I've often wondered, I know this, and I don't mean this seriously, but I often wondered, why hasn't a border patrol agent just shot somebody? Wouldn't that stop people from coming across? I mean, if we were there and we saw some guy get shot, we go, let's turn around.
Might be a bad idea.
That's a bad idea. I don't want to, so there's things you could do. I'm not advocating that at all, but, I think there's good public policy to be had if indeed there's leadership and in this era of politics being so corrupt in the United States and Congress being so inept, the Republicans can't even hardly come to an agreement on who their House Speaker is. Mm-hmm. This is a time for Donald Trump. This is the time for a king for a day to lay out an order and go for it and push it and get everybody in line. Salute the flag.
Why do you think right now, based on what was going on with the Biden administration, that the border became even more porous than it had been before? I mean, you hear these stories about emptying the prisons in Venezuela and bringing them up to the U.S., and I happen to know that's true, right? I mean, I'm trying to figure out, why are we allowing, in fact, here in Utah, allowing it, and in Arizona, allowing it. We had, my wife works for
what do you mean, allowing what in Utah and Arizona?
Allowing planes from Venezuela and Colombia and other places to come into the state and land with immigrants.
Not just crossing the border. They're flying planes in?
Flying planes into the States.
That should be easy enough to take care of.
Yeah,
right?
you think so. But what? How do you get to that point? My wife works for a criminal defense firm.
Mm-hmm.
So she's, small criminal defense firm. And in the last couple of months, they've had 2 phone calls from Venezuelans
mm-hmm.
who have been trying to bring drugs across the border
mm-hmm.
after they already got here.
Mm-hmm.
They both got here. They were both in prison in Venezuela for drugs.
Yeah.
They both got here on a plane sent from Venezuela to, one to Arizona and one to Utah.
Yeah.
Landing here, given housing.
Yeah.
And then, they just carried on with what they already knew, what they were doing in Venezuela, right? They found their connections, started bringing the fentanyl up through the border,
mm-hmm.
and kind of started doing the same thing. That's in a little law firm, just 2 people already doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that's not happening at a wide, in a broader sense. What are the incentives for us to allow that? Why does a Governor Cox allow that? I think he's changed his tune, but why would he allow that? Why is Arizona allowing that? Why does the federal government allow that? What are the incentives?
Well, first of all, those 2 Venezuelans have 0 rights in the United States of America. 0. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. And so they ought to just be put in prison. I mean, I don't know what the legal ethics are,
mm-hmm.
but that law firm ought to just make 1 phone call and say, by the way, these are drug dealers. They're bringing fentanyl into the country. I don't care really much about my bar license at this point. I'm worried about the United States of America, my family, my neighbors. This is who they are. This is where they live. This is their phone number. Go get them out of here, right? I think it's just that kind of behavior. I'd have to believe. I know Spencer Cox. I know him well, but, I know him enough. And I can't believe he would know that a plane flew in with people from Venezuela illegally. I don't know who controls this. FAA control that? I don't know who controls these planes that come in. Whoever it is, that's what I'm talking about. Trump should just say, here's the rule. If you got some weird anonymous plane flying in, first of all, you call the Department of Defense or somebody, escort that plane the heck out of this country, or if they land, there's ice all over it. That just seems to be an example, a scenario that seems so common sense on how to take care of it that I'm not sure Spencer Cox would even know about that. If he knew about it, I'd be embarrassed if he didn't do anything about it.
There was the issue that the mayor of Denver had sent a plane over. Isn't that right? I'm trying to remember this. The mayor of Denver sent a plane of immigrants over to Utah because I'm not in Utah, but the policies here were different than they were in Colorado, I want to say, or something like that.
I don't know. That mayor, from what I know of the mayor, that got to be arrested too, or just be kicked out of office summarily.
What I'm trying to get at here, Paul, it's so loosey-goosey.
Well,
It's
but it doesn't have to be.
It's unbelievable that it's at this point.
It doesn't have to be, and we can fix this without rounding up people, without objectifying individuals as criminals when they are otherwise law-abiding citizens, when they are otherwise part of a thriving economy. There was some movie, I was trying to think of the name of it. There's some movie that I watched. The whole premise was, in one day, all of the undocumented immigrants left. You know, like what do the evangelicals call that? The rapture. Like the rapture. They're gone. And here's all these here's all these rich white people, you know, in Southern California looking like, why is the lawnmower just sitting there? You know, how come my bed's not made? How come this isn't happening? How come homes aren't being built? All sorts of things, you know. And that is honestly as a movie, but that's the reality, right? You know it. I know it. Trump knows it. Everybody who's ever dealt with immigrant understands the impact that undocumented immigrants have on the company. And by the way, I was always using the term illegal alien. Always. I was up at the University of Utah, invited into a classroom, political science, to talk about immigration. I was already on the comprehensive immigration side at the University of Utah, very progressive group of students. I thought safe environment. I used the term illegal alien.
But cut your head off.
They groaned, they moaned. And of course, I'm candid and honest enough. I just stopped and said, all right, what now? You know, what did I say? Well, don't use the word illegal alien. Just use undocumented immigrant. Honestly, if there's anything PC about me in my entire life, that was one moment where I accepted that line. And that's why I use the term undocumented. I get a lot of crap for that. They're not undocumented anymore. They're illegals. You know, they're criminals. Okay, shut up. I just don't want to hear from people like that anymore. I've been on this issue a long time, Greg. I've experienced it. I've seen it firsthand at the border. I experienced it in Utah here. And I've led a fight, a public policy fight. I've watched a governor sign 4 bills that I helped push. I co-authored the Utah Compact. The church never signed the Utah Compact, but a half hour after we released it, they endorsed it, just for clarity's sake.
Which is interesting, honestly.
Yeah, I know. That's because there's this, like I told you, when I'm talking to the senior church official.
Which is, why get involved? Why? I don't know. It's interesting.
Because I'll tell you why.
Well, I mean, I know what their reasons are, but why publicly endorse it?
Because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a covenantal obligation to help the Lamanites. Gentiles in the Book of Mormon, 2 Nephi, I'm looking at it.
I'm waiting for this because I've seen that open the whole time.
I'm looking at it right now. I won't read it to you, but, you know, I mean, we're supposed to be, I will soften the hearts of the Gentiles that they shall be like unto a father to them. Wherefore the Gentiles shall be blessed and numbered among the house of Israel. Why do you think we had the restoration? Because white people coming from Europe were supposed to get the gospel of Jesus Christ? Were we the covenantal people at the time? No. We were playing a role. We are playing a role. Yes. Are we part of the house of Israel? Yes. Especially those of us who've made covenants to be a part of the house of Israel. But the Book of Mormon is clear all throughout it. The Gentiles are supposed to carry on their shoulders the Lamanites. That doesn't mean open borders. That doesn't mean any ridiculous public policy. What it means is Latter-day Saints ought to take a second look at what they think about immigration and why their church leaders support a thing like the Utah Compact, 5 principles. And anybody who hasn't read, if you're a Latter-day Saint and you haven't read the Utah Compact, you should. It's online, utahcompact.com, I think, and just read it. And the church has come out and sustained it again and again and again.
Has the church ever supported open borders?
No.
Okay.
No. They haven't, that I'm aware of.
Because I hear that a lot from members of the church.
It's ridiculous.
Members of the church will come in and say
ridiculous.
That the church,
Never heard that. And I'm telling you, from the horse's mouth of that narrative I shared with the senior church official, if that senior church official doesn't know what he's talking about, then nobody knows what they're talking about. That senior church official is the foremost lawyer in the church.
Yeah. Okay. So dividing it then, because this is the issue usually, is there's a division between the border and those that are already here.
Absolutely.
Those are 2 separate issues.
Absolutely.
But you have to kind of bring them together. I mean, that's what comprehensive is, right? But it never becomes that way. But it's, you have to do both. You have to do both.
You do have to do both.
When I say do both, I mean you have to.
Not in the same bill.
Okay, then you know what, though? In my opinion, based on track record and precedence, you have to do the border first. You have to do the border first. And then you can make things safer for those that are already here.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't know that the sequence is necessary. I know that you have to close the border. You have to get control of your borders. Otherwise, you're not even a nation if you don't have a border, right? So you have to get control, especially of that southern border. I guess now it's the northern border too, but especially the southern border. So yes, that's a must. So if I'm king for a day, that would be my first order. Secure the border. I agree. And I would also make sure that we're addressing the issue of those who are living here already. And we're separating the otherwise law-abiding residents from the criminals. That would be my next task. My third task would then be what I said earlier. I would go into Central and South America. I'd meet with the leaders, dictator or democracy. I'd meet with them all, and I'd say, no more. No mas. As Roberto Duran said, no mas. I'd say, we're not putting up with this anymore. Any nonsense, you will be punished. Your nation, we will punish you.
Well, it seems to me that is the best way. I mean, not the punishment necessarily, but just the addressing the economies and the corruption is the of South and Central and Mexico, America, right? That's the best way to put them on our shoulders. Well, we have the economy. We have the know-how. We have the infrastructure.
Yes.
That's our shoulder.
Yeah.
Why can't we put them on our shoulder and address those issues for them?
Right.
Help them with those issues.
Because you need a king for a day. You need Trump. If I were king for a day in that position, I would coerce those nations. I would carrot and stick them. And if they didn't take the carrot, I would stick them. And I wouldn't even think twice about it.
And when people are hearing that, it's like, look, you're talking about the leaders, right? Because it's for the people. It's for the people.
Look, this is just me, and this is entirely a hypothetical scenario. So please, government, if you're listening, don't go after me. But I would say at some point, I would even go assassinate a dictator. I would remove people. And I mean, why do we have a CIA if we can't do that, right? So why? Well, I mean, they've done it before. Why can't we do it again?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I would say lead. You got to lead. You have to be tough. And this thing is so out of control, you cannot nuance this thing. You have to go after it aggressively. And the part about those living here, you have to be prudent. You cannot just say they're all criminals.
No.
You can't do that.
No, you can't do that. These are families. I know these people. You know, we've got, you know, just even almost everywhere I've gone in the state, we've got a Spanish-speaking branch. I love these people. And honestly,
Is ICE going to go in?
Exactly. Well, you know what? They will.
Will
you know
they?
why? Well, I think they will, because you've got this horrible idea that this is what I do not like about what I've heard from the Trump administration, is that they're now saying the executive order that Trump signed allows them to go into schools and churches.
Yeah.
To find out.
That's
Bad deal. You're not going to school. You're not going to the churches.
Just speculate with me for a second. If you're President Nelson, what do you do? What's your word to stake presidents and bishops?
My word is, I don't know what, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. I know what I would do.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say it.
Yeah. Well, I know exactly what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing you would do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if I were sitting in a sacrament meeting and ICE came in, I would defend.
Mm-hmm.
I would defend my Lamanite
Mm-hmm.
brothers and sisters.
Hmm.
No question. I'd get thrown in jail on their behalf. I'd do it.
Yeah. Any last words?
No, I think that's a wonderfully high note to end on, isn't it? To
It is.
my life.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Paul, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great discussion again.
Thank you.
You know, you ought to think about the issues on immigration. I think that the idea of thinking of everybody as an individual, as a family, is very important. I'm not saying that there aren't issues that have to be addressed. I think there are major issues that have to be addressed, but keep the humanity in it. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.